Welcome to this general election debate in Legislative District 18. I'm Ben Giles, a reporter for the Arizona Capitol Times. I'll be your moderator for tonight. Before we begin, I have a couple of requests that were already mentioned. Please silence all your cell phones and other electronic devices, and please refrain from any interruptions during the debate. It is being recorded for those who would like to watch later and for post-captioning services, so interruptions are going to make that more difficult for the staff at a later time. A little bit about our host tonight, the Citizens Clean Election Commission. The Clean Elections Act is a campaign finance reform and voter education measure. It was initiated by Arizona voters and passed by voters in 1998. As part of its role, Clean Elections provides clean funding for qualified, participating candidates who agree to abide by the Clean Elections Act and rules. Those rules include contribution and spending limits on their campaigns, foregoing special interest money, and participating in debates like this one. Having said all that, I want you to know that this debate is driven by you, the audience. You might have been handed a 3x5 index card on your way in the door. You can write down your questions on that and raise your hand, and staff will bring those questions to me, and I will try to ask as many as I can of our panel tonight. If you need additional cards, just raise your hand. We'll bring you some more. We've scheduled at least an hour and a half for this debate. During the first half, I'll be asking questions of all of our candidates, so we'll take turns one after the other of the whole panel. And I will give each candidate 1 minute to answer those questions. I'll also allow a 30-second rebuttal for the first person to answer the question in case you have something to contribute at the end of that conversation. For the second half of the debate, I'll be able to ask questions of specific candidates. So you, the audience, if you want to ask Sean in particular a question, you would just write Sean on the card. They'll bring that card to me, and then I'll know to direct the question to you. Candidates, for that portion of the debate, you'll have 2 minutes for your answer. And for the rest of you, don't feel left out. If you want to chime in, just raise your hand, give me a signal. I'll give you about 30 seconds to contribute to that question as well. We'll also allow a minute each for closing remarks from our candidates. Just a note about those questions. I am screening them just for content and also for clarity. I don't want to ask the same questions over and over again. And we are looking for real questions, not necessarily a political point or an attack against a candidate. So those are the types of things that I'll be screening out. Again, we ask you to remain polite to all of our candidates. Please give them a fair and uninterrupted debate, no matter how strongly you may agree or disagree with them. And with that, let's get started. You'll each have a minute for your opening statement, and we'll start with Sean.
Thank you, Ben. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for being here on a Friday night. My name is Sean Bowie. I am the incumbent state senator for District 18, which covers all of Ahwatukee, South Tempe, West Chandler, and Southwest Mesa. I was elected for the first time in 2016. I grew up here in our community. I've lived in our community for over 24 years. I'm a product of our public schools. I'm a Kyrene kid. I also went to high school down the road here at Mountain Point, and I've been serving our community for the last 2 years in the Senate. When I sat for this debate 2 years ago, before I was elected, I talked about two things I wanted to work on. The first was to restore education funding, and the second was to work in a bipartisan way at the Capitol. Now that I've been at the Capitol for 2 years, I've done exactly those two things, and I have a record to prove it. I've worked with both parties to restore education funding at the Capitol. We've made some steps in the right direction, but we still have more work to do to get more funding for our schools. I've also worked in a bipartisan way. I was named the most bipartisan member of the Senate last year, and I've worked with both parties on education issues, supporting small business owners, and with our police and firefighters to help keep our community safe. So I'm excited to hear your questions tonight. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mitzi.
Hi, I'm Mitzi Epstein. I'm your current state representative, and I want to thank you all for being here tonight and thank the folks at Clean Elections for doing such a great job to help us all be informed. I'm a computer systems analyst. I've worked for large corporations, and I've run my own small business, custom language training. So I went from computer languages to spoken languages because communicating well gets things done well. And I think that that's what we need is people at the legislature who want to get things done. So I got right to work on solving problems. I organized a stakeholder group to work on reducing youth suicide, and we got results with a suicide prevention specialist in Access. We got results on a number of other things, and most importantly, we are pushing forward to make sure that we fully restore education funding, because it's the foundation for so many other things in our community. I've been involved in our community from the PTO and the Kyrene School Board and the Cub Scouts and the Soccer League for about 21 years.
Thank you. Jennifer.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jennifer Germain, and I'm a candidate for LD18 House of Representatives. I have spent most of my career working in the nonprofit sector on public policy and advocacy, focused specifically in public education, healthcare, and elder care issues. And prior to that, I was a membership director for a Chamber of Commerce. I've also been part of the founding team for Yes Phoenix since the very first Phoenix Startup Week. I've been working with our local tech community to grow, and I look forward to answering your questions and to serving LD18 in the House of Representatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Jill.
Hi, good evening. I'm Jill Norgard. I'm your current representative in District 18. It's been an honor to represent this district in the last 4 years. The district is comprised of 4 different cities, a few highlights of each. The city of Phoenix. I am on the aerospace sector as an aerospace engineer for over 30 years. I'm working to highlight and showcase the aerospace capabilities that we have here in Arizona. I've also hosted 2 ADOT community sessions that have influenced the way the 202 freeway is being developed. A lot of the constituents' inputs have been incorporated. In Tempe, the city of Tempe, I started the first of its kind preschool just for decoding dyslexia. In Chandler, I'm working on an airport project that will be a $42 million investment and bring in 300 new jobs. It will bring in retail and restaurants and literally put Chandler on the map for the Southeast Valley as a premier airport. And in Mesa, I'm excited to just have recently been elected to the board of the United Food Bank. I've been volunteering there for years, so it was an easy transition for me. Thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you. And Greg.
Good evening. I'm Greg Patterson. I was raised in Tucson and moved to Phoenix in the mid-'80s to take a job as an accountant. I'm a CPA. I'm also an attorney. In 1990, I was elected to the Arizona House of Representatives, and I served 2 terms then. I was chairman of the Government Operations Committee. I was chairman of the Banking and Insurance Committee. I served 4 years on appropriations. I was part of the initial charter schools movement. I supported that, as well as the groundwater code revisions that we did in 1992. After that, I served as director of the Residential Utility Consumer Office. I was the state's consumer advocate on utility issues for 5 years. I was chief of staff of the state senate after that. I served on the board of the county hospital. I spent 5 years on the board of regents. So I have extensive experience in healthcare, in education, in utility issues, in addition to being a lawyer and a CPA.
All right, thank you, everyone. Now for our first question. It has to do with, no surprise, education funding. As we all know, the Invest in Ed initiative that would have raised income taxes to boost funding for K-12 public schools is no longer on the ballot. But what I'd like to ask the panel is about the core premise of that initiative, which was to create a new permanent revenue stream to utilize as funding for K-12 schools. Do you support that core idea, and is there something to do about that legislatively in 2019? We'll start with you, Mitzi.
The core principle that we need to restore education funding is an absolute must. I think that what I want to do and what my plan is to bring together my fellow legislators and you, the stakeholders, the ones who know education, and the taxpayers, to determine, number one, how much funding do we need and why? Because I think that $700 million mark is pretty close to a good start. And the second question is how? How do we pay for this? We all want our taxes to be fair. We want everybody to pay. But first, we have to make sure that we're starting from a point of fairness. And right now, our overall tax structure in Arizona is not fair. So if our starting structure is like this, and we put in a level something, it's not going to be level. What we want to do is look at the data, not dogma. We want to leave our biases and our prejudices at the door, come into open, public meetings, and talk about what should we do to support our state's responsibilities, especially public education.
Thank you. Jennifer.
I'm deeply disappointed that InvestorNet is off the ballot because 217,000 people signed that petition to get the right to vote on it, and they're not going to get the right to vote on it. Realistically, if we were to see some kind of dedicated revenue come through, it would need to be done by a voter initiative because current law takes 2/3 of each chamber and the governor to raise any new revenue. Realistically, it would need to be a voter initiative.
All right, thank you. Jill.
As a part of the Appropriations Committee, I was proud to structure and support the teachers' 20 by 20 raise. I was the only House member in our district to support that. And education is not a partisan issue. It's something everyone wants to have what's the best crafted program for their children. We have also additional revenues coming in the state now. We're $250 million over what we had projected last year. We have consolidation of school districts that we will be now looking at. I sent the superintendent report to every member of the House and the Senate so they can take a look at their districts. So consolidation would be able to put additional money in the classrooms for the teachers. And also the Wayfair bill that has just been, the decision that was just made, the estimate right now to date is additional $269 million.
All right, thank you. Greg.
Well, we all support education, and we all support fair taxes, so we've got that going for us. The question is, there was a $700 million tax increase on the ballot, and it was removed. How do you replace it if you're going to replace it? If you're going to replace it, you need to do it with a tax increase that's also on the ballot, and it's going to need to either be income tax or sales tax. The problem with income tax is if you only allegedly tax the rich, they have a lot of flexibility, they have a lot of accountants, and they go away. They can change domicile, et cetera. So that tax was a phantom in that it was written badly and wasn't collectible. If you want to actually address the revenue issue, it's going to have to be sales taxes. It's going to have to be probably a penny or so in addition. It's going to have to be referred to the ballot. I would be willing to do that. Now, I would ask Representative Epstein if she's willing to do that. I mean, we'll see. That'd be a good answer. I'm the one saying I would be willing to do that. It would be interesting to see what the other candidates say.
Well, let's quick follow up with Mitzi on that. A sales tax instead of an income tax. In 30 seconds, please respond.
A sales tax is the most regressive tax I can possibly think of. It hurts the poor more than it hurts everybody else, because when you live paycheck to paycheck, you pay a sales tax on just about everything that you have coming in. When you are more affluent, you don't pay sales tax on all of your income like somebody does. We have the highest sales tax in all of the country, or nearly so. But most importantly, let's first look at what we have. Let's not, at this election table, try to say, oh, here's an answer, because that's biased and that's prejudiced. Let's look at the data, not the dogma.
All right, and Sean, back to that core question. You have a minute. Supporting a new permanent revenue stream for K through 12.
Well, and I want to take a step back here because as an issue, I mean, this is the most important issue that we face as a state. It's much broader than a single initiative or a single budget that's passed. We need to be thinking about the next 10, 20, 30 years, how we're going to fund the education system that we need to compete economically in a 21st century economy. Now, there's two things we shouldn't do, and then I'll go into two things we need to look at. Two things we shouldn't do. The first is expanding vouchers statewide, so voting no on Prop 305. If that were passed and all 1.1 million Arizona school children could do that, that would have a devastating impact on our public schools. The second thing that we should not do, which is something my opponent wants to do, is to eliminate our state income tax. That's $4 billion in a $10.4 billion budget. That would also have a devastating impact. Now, two things we can look at. One is phasing in the 20 by 2020 plan. We pass a budget a year at a time at the legislature, so those next two steps aren't guaranteed. So making sure that we have the budget to fund those increases is important. And the second is looking at Prop 301. We just extended Prop 301 for another 20 years this past session, making sure that that's not rated when it's no longer voter protected in 2021.
All right, thank you. And if you'll humor me, I'm going to jump ahead to the next question for Jill. And this question will just be for our incumbent candidates. Because Jill, you mentioned the vote on the 20 by 2020 budget, which, as Sean just mentioned, is the first of 3 fiscal years of plan to boost teacher pay. Jill, could you explain, you were a yes vote on that budget. Could you elaborate for another minute on why that was the right budget for now and for going forward? And then I'd like to hear from Sean and Mitzi on your respective votes on that.
Absolutely, it was a right thing going forward. We identified a 20 by 20 plan for the teachers. It boosted us into the number 16 as a rank for teacher pay. I think that was a great step in the right direction. We're doing things at incremental stages. At the Capitol, things, as much as we would like them to happen from A to Z, it's usually an incremental step where it goes from A to D to K, and we look at different changes that we make every year, and then we measure them, and we do subsequent changes if it needs to be changed, so we have some fluidity in there. However, I think it was a great plan. I was proud to stand with the superintendents and a lot of the teachers and members from the SOS and members from the education advocacy groups to stand and proudly support the 20 by 2020 plan.
Thank you. Sean?
Yeah, so the budget this year, the budget was not perfect. There's some things I would have liked to have seen. It didn't address higher education funding, for example, our community colleges and our universities. But when I looked at it, the first phase of 20 by 20 was a 10% pay raise roughly. It's ultimately up to the school districts what that percentage is. But I did vote for it because I thought it was a step in the right direction. And when I explained my vote on the Senate floor, I said the exact same thing. I said, this is step 1 of what has to be a 10-step process. And the governor putting forward a 3-year plan while he's on the ballot for re-election, I'd like to see a 10-year plan, a 20-year plan, a 30-year plan. So for me, it was a good first step, but any budget votes in future years, I want us to keep going to step 2, 3, and 4 so we can restore additional education funding for our public schools.
All right. And Mitzi, you were a no vote on that budget bill. Can you explain why?
Yes, I was a no vote because it's a castle built on sand. It sounds good, but there's no there. It took money away from health care and took money away from the environment. It is essentially a let's find some change in the couch cushions kind of a budget. And that's no way to create a reliable future for our kids. If the economy hiccups, it's no good. It won't stand up to it. For the healthcare piece in particular, right now, while we have fewer Medicaid recipients, we should be saving that money for when the recession dips and we need more money for Medicaid care recipients. It's a castle on sand, and I think that we can do better.
Thank you. Thank you. Now back to Jennifer. We'll start with you for this next question for the whole panel. You mentioned in your last answer that it's virtually impossible for the legislature to vote to increase revenue on its own because of the 2/3 majority that's needed in both chambers. There is the possibility, as you discussed, of referring a vote on a revenue increase, a tax increase perhaps, to the ballot. The legislature can do that. But absent of that, is there anything else the legislature can do to find more funds for education?
Absolutely. Right now, we spend far too much money incarcerating people in our state, and we spend far too much money in defending very, very bad laws that attack the civil rights of our communities of color. If we did top-to-bottom criminal justice reform and we stopped passing bad laws that target our communities of color, we would have hundreds of millions of dollars that we could spend on education.
Jill.
Could you repeat the question?
Of course. If politically, since it requires a 2/3 majority vote in each chamber to increase taxes, to increase revenues, is there anything else that can be done legislatively by a vote of the House and Senate to try and find more dollars for K-12 schools?
Well, increasing people coming to Arizona. Our taxes, general revenue is funded by sales tax, income tax, and property tax. And in Arizona, one of the things that we can do is fight to get some of our federal land back because we only own 60% of our state land. And our population demographics in Arizona is quite unique. Of 18 years and younger, we are number 9. We have a huge population of the 50 states of young people. 65 and older, we're number 13, so we have a huge population of seniors and tourists. And between the ages of 19 and 64, we rank 49, so that population is responsible for bringing in a lot of the, and paying a lot of the income tax. So commerce and bringing new jobs into the state of Arizona is going to help bring revenue into the general budget.
All right, thank you. Greg?
I agree that you have to expand the pie, that you have to have a business climate that does bring in businesses, that grows the economy. Traditionally, our economy has grown faster than some of the surrounding states as we have cut taxes. Revenue has risen. The ability to pay for individual programs has risen. The ability to cut funds and make things more efficient is very difficult. People have been trying to do that for a long time. Criminal justice reform is great. I support it. But Arizona tends to take prisons that have capacity of 4,000 and put 5,000 people in it. And when you then take 1,000 people out of it, you don't save that much money. And so prison reform is important, but it's not financially going to be that big a benefit. The key is going to be expand the base by attracting business and consumers.
Thank you. And Sean?
Well, the first I would say is continuing to grow the economy. And we looked at our budget this year, and we had more revenue coming in than was projected. So that's why we were able to do some of the things that we did in the budget, including the teacher raise, because we had more revenue coming in. The economy was growing at a faster rate. So continuing to do that and not doing anything that would interfere with that economic growth is important. Second, when you look at the budget line by line, as we as legislators do, you see a lot of specialty programs that are funded and things that you might disagree with. One example I can give you are the freedom schools at our universities, which are ideological institutes that we fund as a state. We've cut funding for our universities over the years, but we've increased the funding into some of these specialty programs. So looking at things like that, we can find additional revenue on top of what we're already doing through 2020 to try to get more funding into our schools.
Mitzi?
I started advocating for schools in the 1990s, and I recall a lot of the things that have been said in the next 20 years were we need to expand the economy and have more commerce so that we can fund our schools and we can fund everything else. Hasn't worked. It has not worked. And the reason it has not worked is because every year we add another tax credit and another tax credit and another tax credit, and we've chipped away at it so that over time, we now have a $9.5 billion budget. You know what we had over 10 years ago? About a $9.5 billion budget, and we have 500,000 more people. So just saying we'll expand commerce, we've seen that. We've been there. We've done that. Didn't work.
Jennifer, any final thoughts? 30 seconds.
One thing that we need to do to be able to expand our economy is invest in education, because if we don't have the workforce that these companies need, they're not going to come to Arizona, they're not going to stay in Arizona. We need to build our workforce, we need to invest in our children because they are our future.
All right, Jill, this next question will start with you. There was kind of some heightened awareness, I guess is the best way to put it, about how school funding decisions are made. The state obviously provides a pot of money to schools, and the governor, when he announced his 20 by 2020 plan, promised that teachers would get 10% raises in the first year. And what's kind of become more aware is that it's actually the local school districts that are responsible for deciding how that pot of money is spent, and something as specific as how much do each teacher get as a raise. Should there be more control at the legislative level over the way funds are spent in our local schools?
No, that belongs to the school board. One of the benefits of heightened awarenesses of the last year with the education initiatives was that I think people became more educated on the legislative process and then what the responsibilities of the school board is. The legislature designates funds per pupil funding to the districts, and the districts determine that. And as a legislator, I don't want to have the line item responsibility for teacher salaries. That's up to the school board.
All right, Greg?
I agree with the local school board and the decisions they make with their local community and with their superintendent allow them to prioritize their spending based on what they see to be the needs of the community, and they get very detailed into what their community needs, and I support that, and I don't think the legislature should try to usurp it.
Sean?
Yeah, local control is very important. We have locally elected school boards. Those school board members make those budgetary decisions at the local level. They have more expertise on what their districts need, what their teachers need. So yes, I agree. Local control is important. We did in the budget there was an intent clause. I mean, that's the strongest I think we can do. We can say the intent of this funding is for it to go to teacher salaries. But you have some school districts that have buildings in need of repair. I know here in the Kyrene School District, a lot of the schools are going to be about 30 years old, so they're going to need some repairs. Other districts like Gilbert are much newer. They don't need the money for repairs. So I think it's very important to have that local control at the local level. They're the ones who are best equipped to make those decisions about where the funding should go or where it shouldn't go.
Mitzi.
I have been a school board member. And in fact, while I was on the Kyrene School Board, the state of Arizona became one of the lowest in administrative costs of all in the country, and our district was one of the lowest in Arizona. So I like to say that my job as a computer systems analyst is to find cost cuts and efficiencies in operations. And by golly, our administration in Kyrene really did cut the administration. So much so that Arizona really is still very low on their administrative costs. So the answer to the question is yes, we all agree. It should be a local decision. But what I want to point out to make the point is we can't go looking for cost savings by saying, well, there's too much administrative bloat, which sometimes is what the consolidation argument is. The consolidation argument is kind of, well, if there's two districts where there could be one district, then we'd save money with the administration. So it comes back to that administration comment. Well, Arizona is already the leanest on administration in the whole country, or one of the leanest.
Jennifer.
I absolutely agree this should be a local control issue. Our local school board should have the flexibility to do what they see as right for the local students.
All right. Greg, our next question has to do, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, 30 seconds.
Oh, I just wanted to note that in January, we're starting to restore the district additional assistance, and in January we met and announced that $100 million was approved and released, and it went into the schools 90 days after.
All right. Now, Greg, there was also a part of that 20 by 2020 increase that there were some complaints with after it was released. It had to do with the definition of the word teacher and exactly who those raises were going to go to. There's an argument that, teacher maybe in the strict sense of the word, someone standing in front of a classroom, writing on a blackboard, what have you. That isn't the only person who's an educator in a school. Should there be funds, and you mentioned the district additional assistance, that's been cited as a source of funding to allow raises for other school staff. But $100 million spread across all of the schools in Arizona doesn't get very far as in terms of raises for that support staff. What can be done for the non-traditional teachers?
Well, I think that goes back to the local control issue in that different districts are going to want to handle those decisions at different levels. They're going to find, for example, that if you've got some teachers that have been there a long time and are highly paid and you do it just by percentage, then they get a large chunk of the raises while some of the people who are new do not, for example. So that becomes one issue. The other issue is that ultimately became, I think, a symbol of a class warfare issue. It worked out that when folks were kind of redefining teacher, they did it broadly enough to include essentially white collar, blue collar. And it looked like the people who were the college educated folks were the ones who were going to be defined as teachers and they were going to get the raises, and the people who were in the more blue collar positions were not. And I think they backed off of it very quickly once they realized that it looked very discriminatory. But I think the key answer is that you don't want to make those decisions at the state level, you want to make them at the local level. And this was a great example of why you want to do that.
Sean.
Yeah, and this is where I want to give a shout out to some of our local superintendents, talking with them about their budgets for this fall, and they made sure to include support staff in those raises. So I know Mesa, Chandler, Tempe Union, and some others, they included support staff in that definition, and they also gave them raises. So that's an example of where local control is really important. They pulled some of that additional assistance money. Some of them pulled their bond and override funding to help pay for that raise. So they made it work. And that's a good example of how local control is really important when we're talking about state budgets. We allocate the funding at the state level, then let's leave the control at the local level so they can make those decisions and do what's best for their districts and their employees.
Mitzi.
Sometimes it feels to me like that budget was made like this. Let's search all the couch cushions for some cash. Okay, let's take a little bit away from healthcare, or a lot from healthcare. Let's take away from the Department of Environmental Quality. Here's a pot of money. If we want to call that a 9% raise, how many teachers can we give that to? Okay, we can give it to this many teachers. So if we give it to that many teachers, then we can call it a 9% raise. So let's do that. You know what? I think we started backwards. I think we should have started to say, how many people need a raise? How much money do we need? Let's get that money. And if you send me back to the State House of Representatives, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to figure out how much money do we need to adequately prepare our children for their wonderful future and for our future economic support, and with a long-term plan. So I will go back. I'm a long-term planner. I will look at the data and not the dogma, and we'll get a long-term solution to our education funding problem.
Jennifer.
One of the big problems that the teachers came to the Capitol with was not so much their pay level, but their workload level. We met a teacher yesterday who had 31 kids in her kindergarten class. Imagine 31 5-year-olds and trying to keep track of them. There are empirical studies that show that K through third grade, if you have lower class sizes, the children learn better. We need to lower our class sizes, which means we need more teachers overall, which Arizona has a big problem with to begin with. We had over 1,500 vacancies at the beginning of this school year, and we've had over 500 teachers walk off the job already this school year. We have a big problem in education, and a Band-Aid fix is not going to fix it. We need a long-term plan.
Jill.
As far as flexibility in the school board, I am a proponent of the district additional system to help that make it more flexible so they can use that for support staff as well. Also, a couple years ago, I ran a bill that reduced the regulations on school plant funds so that can also be used for maintenance and operations. And one thing I do every year is I meet with our superintendents and I ask, where is the state overreach? What are we doing that is causing you additional work? And we get a lot of information and data from the superintendents and the teachers who are the boots on the ground, who are living the day-to-day burdens that the state puts on them. So another thing that we can do, one of the teachers groups that we met with says, we spend 20% of our time testing. We never get that time back. So we need to look at things and make sure that people understand that we're here to solve problems. We're here to solve problems, but please share with us what your issues are, because there's a lot of things that we've done and we started and implemented 50 years ago that just don't make sense to do today.
Greg, any final thoughts? 30 seconds.
I had a quick follow-up question for Mitzi, which is that you've been doing this since 1990. You've been in the legislature for the last 2 years. You've said 3 times right now, data instead of dogma. The question is, if you want to raise the revenue, you should have a rough idea where we're going to get it. So I would ask where we're going to get it.
Mitzi, 30 seconds.
Mr. Patterson, thank you for all the questions. I hope they keep coming, because this is super fun for me. The point is this. I shouldn't be the one to decide. It shouldn't be me.
Yes,
it should
that's
be
what you
us.
do.
Greg.
It should be us. It should be us. It should be all of us. It shouldn't be my idea. It needs to be our idea. It needs to be an idea that's based in data. And I don't have all of the data because haven't been in the majority party at instructing the JLBC on every move they make. But once we get there and we go back, I will be that much better prepared to ask for the data that we need. And this time around, when I go in and talk to my colleagues and they say, Mitzi, I'll meet with you but behind closed doors, I'm going to say no. I'm holding an open meeting. Meet me there.
Greg?
I would say that's why you elect us. You elect us because we can set priorities on revenue and expenses and what should be done and then how much revenue should come in and how it should be come in. I've said I'd be willing to put a sales tax on the ballot. I think I'm the only one who's actually said, here's a revenue stream that we'll put on the ballot to replace invest in ed. So I'd just like to see where everybody else is.
All right. Another school issue that you might have read about in the news lately has to do with charter school accountability. There's been a lot of reporting by the Arizona Republic about the way Primavera High School has been spending some of the state tax dollars that are sent to that charter school. And there's been discussions about, should there be more oversight and transparency in charter school finance? Should there be more teeth for the legislature or the Charter School Association to ferret out perhaps bad actors in the charter school realm? Sean, what can be done legislatively to address those concerns?
You're right. This has been in the news a lot lately. And I want to start off by saying, we have some great charter schools here in the area. Horizon is just down the road here. A lot of great charter schools around the state, but there are some bad actors out there. And Primavera is one example of there not being as much oversight and accountability over charter schools as there is over district schools. So for me, there needs to be a level playing field when it comes to transparency and accountability for our public schools. Charter schools are public schools. They're publicly funded, so they should be held to the same standards as district schools. This gets in the debate of vouchers as well, and one of the reasons why I'm opposed to statewide voucher expansion is there is no accountability over how those dollars are spent at private or parochial schools. So for me, I don't think it's too much to ask our charter schools to abide by the same transparency and accountability measures as our district schools, because when all schools are on the same level playing field, they can compete against one another. School choice is a good thing, but we need to make sure that that playing field is level so nobody has an unfair advantage when we're talking about our K-12 schools.
Mitzi.
Yes, I believe our schools overall need appropriate accountability measures. So I've pulled together a cadre of legislators, and we are working on 3 areas. One is fiscal accountability and transparency. It's taxpayers' dollars. You should be able to see how it's being spent, whether it's a school district or a charter school. It's public funds. The second is charter school boards and their procurement. We've also read in the news about several procurement, that's when they buy construction or they buy anything, and it seems a little bit like nepotism is going on, and we want to make sure that that is above the board, transparent. The third is teacher quality. We're working on these bills because we know that $8 million to the CEO of Primavera is wrong. That's just not right. If we had a superintendent making $8 million, I think the streets would be flooded with people. This is just a really bad thing we've allowed to happen, and our laws need to be changed so that we have that transparency and accountability. And as a school board member, I developed a track record of transparency.
Jennifer.
I want to echo everything that Mitzi and Sean have previously said, but also say that we need more accountability, especially when it comes to our special education students who go to charter schools. We have a lot of bad actors in our charter schools who tend to disinvite special education students after their 100th day. School funding is based on 100 days of enrollment. I want to introduce a bill that will specifically target our special education students and take their entire funding day by day by day, and whatever is left over after that 100 days goes back to that district school with that special education student, so that our district schools do not have to unfairly absorb extra costs for special education while charters get to pocket that money.
Jill.
Fraud is fraud, whether it's Primavera or Scottsdale Unified. If we have bad apples out there, we need to prosecute them and investigate them. And transparent accountability, because we have been improving in that vein, we have found things like Primavera and Scottsdale Unified. So we are making progress. As technology advances, some of the fraud gets craftier, and so we have to continue to look at that and be flexible in how we can monitor that. Now, this year we had a Senate bill that was transparency improvement for financial accountability, and we also had House Bill 2663, which improved, tightened up the transparency and the accountability for charter schools, and that's a bill that I supported. I believe Senator Bowie supported that, and Ms. Epstein did not support that.
Right. Greg.
I think that's a bipartisan issue. The Attorney General was on Horizon a couple days ago talking about what we need to do to crack down on some of the charter schools, to increase transparency on charter schools, et cetera. The problem is that a lot of it is not fraud. It's currently legal. And so changing the rules so that there is procurement, there is transparency, there is accountability is something that I think we all support. I think we all support that.
Sean, any final thoughts?
Just to echo something that Jennifer said, one of the things I did last year as the senator for our community is I visited all of our public schools. We have 45 public schools here in the district. I visited all of them, including the charter schools. And one of the first questions I asked each of the charter schools was, show me your special education population, your special education students. I want to make sure that parents with special needs children are able to send their kids to charter schools if they like, and that those charter schools are not unfairly discriminating against students because of their ability. So when we talk about accountability, that's one of the things that I always think about is making sure that they are accepting of all students, that they're not cherry picking their students, and that all children have an opportunity, whether it's at a charter school or at a district school.
Moving on to a different topic now, water was actually an interesting topic that didn't really get too far in the legislative session this year. The governor had tried to sort of consolidate the voices that are speaking on behalf of Arizona's water supply in negotiations with other states as far as what our share of the Colorado River should be, as well as some other reserves we have in northern Arizona. Mitzi, obviously that didn't get anywhere as far as voting goes at the Capitol. Was the governor on the right track, yes or no, and what should be done about water supplies in Arizona moving forward?
The answer to your yes/no question is no. The governor was not on the right track. In 2017, the group he pulled together was very small and very limited, and it was unlike the tradition Arizona has of being very inclusive. Our history of water management has been lauded as being very good, and I believe part of the reason was we pulled all the hydrologists into the room and all of the lawyers into the room, and we developed a really inclusive plan, because it's terribly important. Nobody wants sinkholes, and nobody wants a faucet that you turn on and dust comes out. But that has happened in Arizona. We have actually a sinkhole problem, and we have homes down in southern Arizona where they've turned on the faucet and dust comes out. So it's a very important problem that deserves everybody at the table. So now we do have a more inclusive drought plan, drought contingency plan going on. The steering committee is far more inclusive, and this time it includes legislators. Not that legislators are so perfect, but the plan is going to go to the legislature. So now having them on the committee, I am hopeful will bring us to a better solution.
Thank you. Jennifer.
The 1980 Groundwater Management Act was groundbreaking. Arizona was at the forefront. We are not going to meet the standards set forth in that act. We are critically low. We are critically close to a tier 1 shortage for water. That means forced water restrictions for all of Arizona's residents. We need not just the people that Mitzi mentioned, but we need the engineers, we need the environmentalists, and Arizona needs to actually go to the table. Arizona did not go to the table to renegotiate the Colorado River Compact. We need to be at the table if we are going to negotiate.
Jill.
The conversations and the bills that were discussed last year were just not ready for prime time. There weren't enough groups that were involved, like Mitzi mentioned. The legislators were not involved. Central Arizona Project. When we became a state in 1912, the water rights and a lot of the processes were set up. We subsequently had the Groundwater Act, but it's a lot different. Our state is a lot different. When we initially became a state, a lot of our state was a higher percentage of agriculture than it is, and now it's more tilted towards home development. So all the rights are being pulled, and everyone's kind of protective of their area, and we have the tribal groups too that are also involved with their water rights. So it's something that we shouldn't make a knee-jerk reaction. We need to be very methodical and thoughtful about this process. So I'm frankly glad it's taking a long time, because I want to make sure that the ideas are thoroughly vetted before we make any changes.
Greg.
Water in Arizona has traditionally been a bipartisan problem, and it has been a problem that we have really been ahead of the curve for a long time. So in 1992, we amended the 1980 Groundwater Code. I was on the Natural Resources Committee when we did that. It was bipartisan. One of the things that we did was we started actually wet water banking, as opposed to just credits. We took the water that we had that was in the Colorado River that we weren't using, and much of it we still aren't using to good use, except that we are actually putting it in percolating wells into the aquifer. The reason that we have questions about how do we get it out of the aquifer now is that I was part of the group that started putting it into the aquifer in 93 and 94. And so water is very, very difficult. It is very sophisticated. It needs to be bipartisan. And let's not think that we're just starting from scratch. A lot of people have been working on this for a long time, and I'd like to continue being part of that process.
Sean?
Yeah, and as Ben said, the governor tried to rush through a series of bills, and I disagree with the way he handled it. It was not a bipartisan process. There were many members, even of the majority in the legislature, who were not included. The business community, our locally elected water board was really not included as well. So as some of the others have said, this is a bipartisan issue. It's something that the governor needs to invite everyone to the table, our locally elected water board as well. This is a hugely important issue for our future, for our economic development, 100 years down the road. So we all need to work together on this. Conservation is going to have to be a part of it. We've seen what other states have done here in the Southwest, some of their conservation efforts, but this needs to be a collaborative process, because the bills that we had in the Senate this year, they were defeated in a bipartisan vote. There was opposition on both sides. So we need to start from square one, involve everyone, and get this done for our future and for our state.
Mitzi, any final thoughts?
It feels like we can sing Kumbaya with this one. There is a lot of bipartisan support for a lot of inclusion, and legislators really felt, all parties, that it needed to be more inclusive, and so it did get better. And I do agree that it needs to be a long-term solution. We should take our time and get it right. I do think that one of the things we want to remember, though, is that we should not allow horse trading to happen. There's a thing called forbearance, that we want to make sure our water is protected and that we do leave it be wet water, as Mr. Pearson said, because credits coming out of your faucet doesn't really work. We want to make sure that we have that wet water. And sometimes when they start to play around with the accounting in forbearance and other things, it's not water coming out of your faucet. And that's what I want to look out for, is make sure that we're protecting Lake Mead and that we have actual wet water. I like that phrase.
All right, and I like the phrase kumbaya for the next question. So it's interesting, I've been watching the Capitol and the legislative process for 6 years, and kind of one of the things that you wouldn't really know unless you were there is that a vast majority of the bills that are voted on a daily basis are voted on in a bipartisan manner. 60 to nothing votes in the House, 30 to nothing votes in the Senate. It happens all the time, but it doesn't happen on a lot of the core issues. And so the question is, we've heard talk of needing bipartisan work on some of these big issues, education, water policy. How can you actually get that done? Because frankly, it just doesn't happen that often at the Capitol. Jennifer.
I think the first step to getting that done is having an open door policy and being open to meeting with everybody, even if you disagree with them, because you can always learn something even if you disagree with somebody. And that's one thing that I really enjoy doing, is getting all sides of a problem, views from all sides, so that I can make an educated decision on whatever is before me.
Yeah, Jill, as a member of the controlling party in the House, certainly the Republicans have the ability to push through legislation, by a simple majority vote without Democrats. Is there anything that you can do to bring the minority party, to bring some bipartisanship under the fold more often?
Ben works for the Capital Times, and they sell newspapers. And as he mentioned, most of the things that we work on down at the Capitol are not partisan issues. We work together on a lot of things. But the things that are the high drama that sells the papers are some of the issues that he talked about, which is actually a small fraction of what we work on. The bills that I've passed, that I've introduced, they've all had bipartisan support. Just yesterday, Sean and I talked to Sean, we were working on an issue. We've got an issue in Tempe that we're working on. I sit next to Reggie Bolding. He's one of my favorite people to work with. He's a Democrat, I'm a Republican. We agree to disagree, and I said, we're an example of how partisanship should work. So I don't feel the the doom and gloom that you're speaking of so much, Ben. I enjoy working with both my Republican and my Democratic colleagues.
Greg.
I think you have a great example of bipartisanship here because Sean is at the end of the table. And so there are complex bills that are controversial where the Democrats have an opportunity at the end to move it as far as they can in the right direction and then vote either for it or against it. And Sean did a fantastic job on that, on both the budget and on the ASU U of A higher education bonding package. So I don't understand why that wasn't a bipartisan bill. That was a bill that was supported by Republicans, but it was also supported by the universities. It allows the universities to bond and get additional building and get additional investment. Sean looked at that and voted yes, and Jill voted yes. It's bipartisan. I wish there had been more more Democrats who voted for it, but Sean's just a great example of that.
Sean.
Well, thank you, Greg. I referred to our debate 2 years ago, and one of the things I mentioned in that debate was wanting to work across the aisle in a bipartisan way. I've lived in this community for over 24 years. That's what our community is looking for in their legislators. And Ben wrote an article for the Capital Times last year looking at the voting records, and I was found to have the most bipartisan voting record in the Senate. So I have a record to prove that I'm working in a bipartisan way. I had a bill passed this year that was signed into law by the governor. It's very rare for a member of the minority party to have that happen.
I voted for it.
Thank you, Jill. Mitzi did too. And because I have those relationships with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle and with the governor's office, I was able to go to them and get support, and that bill was signed into law this year, a really important bill that helps people with disabilities. Back in 2017, there was a logjam with the budget and the university bonding, and there weren't the votes there for the budget, so the governor's office came to me, talked to me about ideas and ways that we could look at things in the budget. So for me, it's just having a proven track record of working across the aisle. For me, it's always going to be about what's best for our community, the community that I grew up in. So that's always going to be my approach in the legislature.
All right, Mitzi.
My background is in business, and I've written computer systems. You don't get one system to work with the others unless you collaborate. And so I talk about collaboration a lot, and I've honed some pretty intensive skills in bringing many ideas together to synthesize a very strong solution, because you cannot have a strong solution unless it can meet many different people's situations. And so I bring collaboration. I'm sorry, I don't have a political background. I talk about collaboration. I don't talk about bipartisanship. But since I'm a politician now, I guess I should try to say that more often. But here's the thing. If we want more collaboration, inclusion, bipartisanship, we have to change the rules. The rules of let's slam as many bills as we possibly can through the legislature in as little time as possible don't give time for that kind of collaboration and working. I would like to see us look at some other states and see a better schedule. I really like the idea of what if we worked 2 weeks on and 1 week off? Imagine if your legislators came back to you in your district for a week and said, hey, these are the bills we talked about last week. What do you think? That's how we get real inclusion and collaboration going, when we include you.
Jennifer, any final thoughts?
As somebody who's worked on the outside, as a policy advocate trying to get things passed, when you're open to meeting with everybody, sometimes you find really weird collaborators, and we found a wonderful champion for feminine hygiene products in Representative Noel Campbell from LD1. It was something that we never thought would ever happen, and we got an administrative rule change in our corrections system so that female inmates now have more access to feminine hygiene products. And that was done through open meetings and collaborating with both parties.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for the plugs for newspapers in the Arizona Capital Times that round. It's all right. We're going to move on to some questions for specific candidates now. I'll remind you, I'm going to give you a little bit longer, 2 minutes for these answers. And once again, if you're not the candidate who was asked the question, please don't hesitate to give me a wave and let me know that you'd like to chip in too. Our first question is for Jill. You mentioned earlier that you'd like to explore consolidating school districts. There are certainly a lot of them. Could you elaborate a little bit more on what that would look like? And have you heard any figures yet on, obviously depending on the extent of the consolidation, how much could that generate potentially for K through 12 public schools?
Okay, well, Arizona has over 225 school districts. The administrative costs last year were $763 million. We have way more school districts than we need. Maybe in 1912, when we were first a state, it made sense. But with the advent of technology and Skype, do we really need to have that many school districts? Nevada, to our north, our neighbor to the north, has 17. And when you run the numbers, approximately a third of the superintendents manage 2 or fewer schools. 60% of superintendents manage 5 or fewer schools. Now, I ran a report, I sent it to all the members in the House and the Senate, both parties, to take a look at specific to their district to see if there might be an opportunity. It's really something that has to start at the grassroots level and ask your school board, is it worth? Are you willing to take a look at a consolidation or streamlining of the administration to put more money into teachers' pockets? We have a big district here in Chandler. Mesa's relatively big. It's no coincidence that the top paid teachers in the state are from the biggest school districts. So I think it's definitely something that's a huge opportunity for us to take a look at.
All right. Anyone else? Mitzi.
I think that I've been around the block a few times on school consolidation, and I think that it really is, as she mentioned, each local area needs to look, and what can we do? Because things like, I appreciated you sharing, that was a great deal of bipartisanship, sharing your list of school districts with all of us. But you have to take that deep dive, and I know as an analytical person you'd want to do that too, because when there are one person looking after 3 or 4 or 2 schools, well, if each school is 300 miles apart from each other, then that might be the most efficient way to do things. And that's what we have to look at when we look at consolidations. We really have to analyze each situation. I also have this question for you, Representative Norgaard. Since you're very keen to look at administrations and the potential for efficiencies in school districts, are you equally keen to look at efficiencies in our charter schools and go along with my bill for transparency in charter schools to do the same kind of audit and reporting to parents in charter schools that we have for school districts, the classroom reporting, Auditor General's report?
Absolutely, and we did a little bit of that in House Bill 2663 last year in the budget.
And we can go take that to show the whole report to parents. Glad to hear it. See?
Bipartisanship.
We're just
Look at that.
That was the easy one.
tonight.
All right. Our next question, Sean. There are obviously some times when you vote a little bit differently than the rest of your Democratic colleagues in the Senate. I guess the way the question would be framed is there division in the Democratic Party? Do they need to show more unity, firm against some of the policies that are pushed by the Republican majority? Is there anything you can do to unite the party in that front a little bit more, or is that not even necessary?
Well, I can't speak for all of my colleagues at the legislature, but when I vote on bills, for me, it's a community-first approach. So there are some issues that are really important to our community and our district, and it's not really about party lines. And I have shown that I'm not afraid to work with anybody who has good ideas on bills that help our community. So I can't speak for my colleagues. Every legislator is different. Every district is different. Most of the legislators at the Capitol represent either really safely conservative districts or really safely blue districts. We have kind of a blend here. We have one of the more competitive districts in the state. It's a lot of independent voters in our community. So for me, it's truly, I take every bill and I think about how is this going to impact Ahwatukee and Chandler and Tempe and Mesa. And that's the approach that I'll continue to take with me in the Senate if I'm reelected.
All right. Mitzi?
Thank you.
Just a guess.
Yes, you are right. Sean and I do vote differently every once in a while, and I think that's a beautiful thing, that we can have disagreement within the party. And it speaks to the fact that we both are about community and not party. And I also think that all of you are very clever and smart and can listen to the things that we say, and you'll generally find, oh, they really agree on an awful lot of things. But in the House, I have the luxury of having 60 votes, so I can frequently be that protest vote to say, I am going to hold us to a higher standard. I'm tough on bills. I admit it. But do you want to send somebody who's a pushover to the legislature? So in the House, it's different from the Senate. In the House, I can be extremely tough on bills because I think that's what you want. You want somebody who's going to make this better. You don't want somebody who'll just say, oh, it's okay, it's good enough. I don't think that's good enough. You deserve my very best, and that's what I bring. I do my very best homework for you, and I bring my very best game for you. And when I vote, I want you to have the very best.
All right. Jennifer, anything to add on this Democrat question?
Well, when I advocate for the nonprofits that I work for, we talk to both Republicans and Democrats, and a lot of good bills don't get heard because they've got the wrong party designation behind the person who introduces it. So there's a lot of shuffling around and politicking that goes on behind the scenes to get a good bill heard. And we should really be deciding what gets heard based on the content of the bill versus the person whose name is on the top of it.
All right. Greg, this next question is for you. As you mentioned earlier, you would support referring a sales tax increase to the ballot if you're elected to the House. The last time Arizona voters had a chance to cast a vote on a sales tax, they rejected the extension of the sales tax that was adopted during the height of the Great Recession. Is something different now? Why is that something that voters should buy into?
So one point is, the last time we were here, I thought we were all brilliant, and I looked at the tweets, and it said, you know, the flag is upside down. And I looked at this angle again, and I think, is the flag still upside down? I think the Arizona flag is still upside down. So I think Tom is going to be fixing that for the next debate. Everybody talks about the tax cuts. The tax cuts have decimated the economy, et cetera. And people forget about the tax increases that have gone through. So Prop 301 was in the Hull administration with Republicans controlling the House and the Senate. It raised $1 billion for 20 years and then was just now extended. Governor Brewer said we needed a $1 billion temporary tax increase. She put it on the ballot. Again, a Republican primarily package, but she got bipartisan support, but it couldn't have gone on the ballot or been approved without Republican support, and it was approved. Now, one of them was rejected, but that was because it was that issue extended, where they said, hey, it's temporary, it's only going to be a couple years, and then a group said, oh, we'll see if we can get voters to extend it. And they had very little support for extending a tax where they had promised it to be temporary. So that was a one-off. That was unique. Voters have shown that they support education funding, and they're willing to go to the ballot and generally support education funding at the ballot. And even though I am traditionally a low-tax guy and in the legislature have been for tax fairness and for taxes as low as possible, I recognize that when Republicans have put tax issues on the ballot for education before and supported them, that they have passed almost every single time. And if education funding is going to be a priority for the populace as much as it is for us, and if we have got as much efficiency as we can out of the system, and if we really are going to come up with revenue into the system, we need an honest answer that says, okay, put a sales tax increase on the ballot and see if people really support it.
Let me ask a follow-up, because there isn't going to be an opportunity, obviously, to vote on an income tax increase in 2018. And traditionally, if a ballot initiative or a legislative referral to the ballot is approved in a non-election year, you wait until the next general election. Would you want to wait until 2020, or would you want a special election on a tax increase as soon as possible?
No, if you're going to do that, you need to make it as fair as possible and not hide the ball by putting it in April of an odd-numbered year. I mean, that's a classic trick. You see a lot of the bond programs do that. You see a lot of the cities do that. They do that because it drives turnout down, and then the people who are the special interest who like that particular issue can dominate that issue. So I believe that elections need to be on the second Tuesday, first Tuesday of even-numbered years where they're supposed to be. The bottom line is that the Red for Ed folks on that initiative absolutely botched the drafting of it. I mean, we can talk about the Supreme Court, which is bipartisan, has Napolitano picks, et cetera, on it, but the bottom line is they could have taken it to Legislative Council and made sure they had the right language. They had the wrong language. They botched it on a couple different issues, and that was enough to get it removed from the ballot. So that is an opportunity lost, but it's not an opportunity lost because somehow the Arizona Chamber of Commerce dominates everything. It's because they drafted it badly.
All right. Our next question is for Mitzi and also for Jennifer. Democrats have had a lot to say about empowerment scholarship accounts, better known as vouchers in some circles. At times, Mitzi and Jennifer, we've heard you guys speak out against the voucher program, against ESAs, and certainly I think you're both on the record as no's on Prop 305 to undo the law passed in 2016, I guess it was now, to expand the vouchers. But you've also voiced some support for the program as it is. I want to give you each 2 minutes to just elaborate your position on the ESA program, how you feel about the way it runs now, and how you feel about possible expansion in the future. We'll start with Mitzi.
2 minutes, I love it. When it was first created, the Empowerment Scholarship Account program was created for children with special needs. Arizona already has a program before ESAs to allow special needs students to take their dollars from the school district would have gotten and go to a private school that offers the specialty that they need, autism, dyslexia, whatever it might be. But the plan that was created with no accountability. It's a debit card. It puts your tax dollars on a debit card and gives it to the parent to decide what to do with it. And here's the thing, I think parents are great at deciding what their children need for education. But when it comes to your tax dollars, I think that's where we need to have some accountability. In fact, I think that accountability to the taxpayers is imperative, and also accountability to the parents to make sure that the parents know what is going on inside that school. That's where the transparency needs to be there. So the program grew, and each year they said, well, gee, it looks good. Let's add another group and another group and another group. And then they said, let's make it be for everybody. Well, if we made it for everybody, it would bust the budget because it takes money out of the general fund instead of just property taxes. And everybody knew it would bust the budget. And that's why in the Senate, they fought so hard, and they finally put that amendment on there that said, okay, we're going to put a cap on it. And then you saw the newspaper headlines that said, we're going to get rid of that cap and open it up for everybody. But remember, that will bust the budget. The bottom line on this is that your tax dollars, you as a taxpayer, deserve accountability. Parents deserve accountability and transparency. And when we work with your tax dollars, that's what I'm going to make sure you have, to make sure that every dollar that we invest gives us a return and that we're educating children.
Thank you. Jennifer.
To echo what Mitzi said, I support the original program, the program that is for special needs kids, the program that is for foster children, the program that is for military families. Those families need the additional help. They have very unique needs that sometimes cannot be met in our public schools. Those families need the additional help. What I oppose is expanding it to everybody. Number one, it will bust the budget. And number two, people are already using their ESAs for family vacations to Africa to go on a safari to learn about animals. That is not an appropriate use of our tax dollars. The base language for Proposition 305 does not have any accountability for the taxpayer. We need to know how that money is being spent. It is transparency and accountability to the taxpayer, and Prop 305 does not do that. And that's why I urge everybody to vote no on Prop 305.
Jill, you had something to add?
Okay, I just want to be clear. So you both support the current ESA program. Is that correct?
The original program that is small for those select students.
So
Yes.
for military, special needs,
Foster care.
foster care, and failing schools.
Yes.
Mitzi?
It needs accountability reforms. The fact that we don't even know where the money is being used is really not acceptable.
Okay, so I just want to be clear, because a year ago, both of you came out against any ESA programs because you said it took money from the general and steered it towards private schools. So could you clarify your position, why that changed?
That is not a true statement. I have always been supportive of the original program. What I came out against was the expansion of the program.
Okay, Mitzi?
The same. It's the expansion is the problem. But, so I recognize the value to special needs families of taking away the red tape to get what is their right anyway. But that is only for special cases, and I really want to see accountability measures added to those programs, because the special needs families I've spoken with have said, we would be happy to oblige by those accountability measures. We would be happy to show that this is really a good program for my child and that this is how we're spending the money. But that's not what's happening right now.
Jennifer?
One other thing that this expansion does with Prop 305 is it takes that original population and puts them at the back of the line. They lose all priority to those ESAs, and I want to keep those ESAs for that special specific population.
Sean, you had something to add?
Yeah, and just to reiterate what some of my colleagues up here said, I support the original ESA program. It's primarily for students with special needs, military families, and so on. What I am opposed to is the expansion of the program. That's what Senate Bill 1431 was about. That was the bill that led to Proposition 305. And this is one of the biggest differences between my opponent and I. My opponent was on record in 2016 as supporting a statewide expansion of vouchers, which was the original Senate Bill 1431. The original bill, before it was amended, would have expanded this to all 1.1 million Arizona school children, that they could apply for this and receive it, and no accountability over how those dollars are spent. It had to be capped because the original bill did not have the votes in the Senate. The vote in the Senate was 15 yes and 15 no. I was one of those 15 no votes. So if there was one more yes vote, what would be on the ballot this year is not a cap at 30,000. It would have applied to all 1.1 million Arizona school children. And some of the people opposed to 305 this year are opposed to it because the cap's in there. And if the voters were to pass 305, that would be a voter-protected initiative, meaning that you could not get rid of the cap. So the groups behind voucher expansion, what the goal is if 305 fails, they want to bring the original bill back to the legislature to open it up to all 1.1 million Arizona school children. So that expansion statewide to every student in Arizona is what I'm opposed to.
Greg, everybody else has said something on this, so I might as well throw it to you as well.
My understanding is that the program does have a designated list of things on which the money can be spent, and that it is audited from the Arizona Department of Education. Because we've seen reports about what it has been spent on and people who've been prosecuted, et cetera. So I'll be open to correction on that, but my understanding is that the program is monitored on that. Let me also say that the Joint Legislative Budget Committee has scored it, and while we can say, oh, it takes money out of the general fund, et cetera, a child who chooses to use ESAs gets less funding than that same child in the public school system. So we can argue about the accuracy of it, but when the Joint Legislative Budget Committee, which I do believe is bipartisan and is technical, when they scored it as a savings. So I think that's an important thing to remember as well.
Mitzi, you had a 30 seconds for a response here.
The list of things that you can use an ESA for are things like literally curriculum. So call a trip to Africa curriculum, I guess. So it's floppy. And the auditing, they can't audit it because they'll see we sent money to Brophy School, Brophy Academy, Bropey Academy. It's just a mess. The auditing is not really happening. So I'm glad to hear you're open to reforming. You're an accountant. You get that stuff. You know that this should be better.
Well, and let me comment as well that I think we have a lot of agreement here, and I think that's really striking on a very controversial issue. It sounds like we all support the original program, and we all support having that program be accountable. That's a huge progress on an issue that I think was deemed as very controversial. The original program was, a lot of people screamed that the world was falling apart. So if we can agree that the original program with accountability is an acceptable program, then that's tremendous progress.
All right.
Can we just verify, though, where our two Republican friends stand on the expansion? And so, as Sean pointed out, if Prop 305 goes down and is voted no, there will be an effort to come back and to expand it. Where do you stand on that?
There may be an effort to come back. I have publicly opposed Prop 305 because, like Ms. Germain said, it puts the special needs kids at the back of the line. It doesn't have as much transparency, and it is voter protected. And so in the fluidity of this type of a program with school choice, it is going to make it very difficult to ever change the program ever again. And I like to have the flexibility that lands with the legislator in this type of a program.
All right. And Greg?
I was in the vanguard of the school choice movement. I support school choice. I support charter schools as one avenue and the original program that we did here as the second avenue. So I wouldn't do statewide expansion.
That means a no vote on Prop 305.
Well, the no vote on Prop 305 is weird. The question you originally did was, do you support statewide expansion? And I do not. The original bill and then 305 is so badly written in a weird combination that I'm going to vote no on 305, but I don't know who really is voting yes on 305.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you all for leading yourself in a pretty healthy discussion without my help there. I hope they'll bring me back for another one of these.
And I don't feel like we got a really good answer from Representative Norgaard.
I think we got a good enough answer. And just as a matter of time, we're going to start wrapping things up with closing arguments. You each have 1 minute for a closing statement, and we'll start again with Sean.
Thank you, Ben. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here and enjoying this robust debate that we've had. I'm running for re-election to continue the work that I've done the last 2 years, which is continuing to work to restore education funding here in our community and also working in a bipartisan way across the aisle. Very proud of the broad bipartisan support that we have in this campaign. We have unanimous support from our public safety community, from our police officers, our firefighters, our state troopers. We have unanimous support from the business community. All 5 chambers of commerce representing District 18 have endorsed our campaign. Realtors, doctors, nurses, teachers, pretty much every profession that's endorsed in this race has supported me. So I would appreciate your support as well. And thank you for being here tonight. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Sean. Mitzi.
Thank you again for being here tonight. I look forward to going back to the State House of Representatives because I think that we need long-term plans. I don't want to allow any more of just run in and get a short-sighted budget done. I think that we can do a lot better job with long-term planning. I have the business background in collaboration and bringing people together. I already have a neighbors council that is very collaborative. I'm creating a group of renters that is about collaboration. Send me back to the State House of Representatives so that I can help solve problems with you for our community.
All right. Thank you. Jennifer.
Thank you, all of you, for coming tonight, and thank you for everybody who's watching online. I'm the only outsider here on this panel. I've never actually worked for a government. I've always worked for nonprofit agencies and for contractors. I have a history of bringing together multiple stakeholders to solve big problems. I've done it with the Yes Phoenix community. I've done it with nonprofits here in Arizona. I've done it with foreign governments with my work along the Arizona-Mexico border. And I would love to be able to serve you in our Arizona State Legislature. And thank you. My name is Jennifer Germain, and I would appreciate your vote on November 6th.
Thank you. Jill.
Thanks, everyone, for coming tonight. And if you are a retailer, I appreciate your vote because I was just named the Legislator of the Year by the Arizona Retailers. So I'm really happy about that with my pro-business initiatives that I have been doing in the capital the last 4 years. I've also been endorsed by the Tempe, Chandler, Mesa, and Arizona Chambers of Commerce, as well as the firefighters, the home builders, the realtors, the osteopaths, CPAs. So I have a broad coalition of support, and I hope I can earn your support on November 6th. If you have any other questions that I didn't answer, please go to my website, Jill Norgard, with 2 A's. That's the Norwegian spelling, 2 A's, jillnorgard.com, and email me, and I'll be happy to get back to you.
All right, thank you. And Greg?
One message: vote for Jill. And the reason is Jill's done a fantastic job. She's been in the legislature for 4 years. She's done a great job. I'm not running against her. I think she should come back. I think she should be reelected. You get to vote twice. And so for the second one, I would appreciate you consider me for that vote. The other candidates are great. We're different on the issues. We're different on the experience level. I think my experience level is more comprehensive. I think my work as a consumer advocate, I think my work on the health board, I think my work on the regents, I think my training as a lawyer, and I think my training on as a CPA, plus 4 years in the legislature already, make me the best of the second tier of candidates. So vote for Jill, and then take a look at the rest of us, and hopefully you'll vote for me as your second choice.
All right. Let's give a big thank you to our candidates. Thank you for participating tonight. Now, if you'll bear with me, I just have a couple of closing comments. Once again, thank you to the audience as well for your questions, for taking the time to come out and get a little more informed. We encourage you to visit www.cleanelections.gov/voter-dashboard. You can find a more customized experience there to find out more about this race and any others you're interested in. And you can always rewatch these debates if you want to sit through this again. They'll be online in about 24 hours. Other debates are also on demand, so we offer that to you at cleanelections.gov. On your way out, if you could, please take some time to fill out the debate evaluation form and return them to one of the volunteers in the back. We really do appreciate your feedback on that. It helps us shape these debates in the future years. And one more time, thank you so much for coming tonight. You're welcome to stay and talk with the candidates now that we're done.